It's really interesting for a director to work with people who have some native ability to act.
I'm pulling you over because your windshield smashed.
The most difficult thing for them to do, by the way, is to
All this current?
play a character that's close to them in life. It's much more easy, for example, for Jamie McBride to be playing a villain than for him to be playing a cop. But in working with them, it would be a mistake for me to expect them to have the kind of technique that comes from years and years of training. As a director, I have to find the means, maybe through subtle suggestion or whatever, to help Jamie McBride lose himself in the moment of what he's doing, because it'll be really good and spontaneous only the one time. And what Jamie McBride is doing here is not playing, he's doing. And even though it's something as routine as a traffic stop, nevertheless, there's a 120-man film crew all around Jamie McBride, and for him to be unself-conscious about that process is the objective, and to just do what he, in fact, does, which is a normal traffic stop. The deeper work that goes into this kind of thing is, in fact, how did Vincent become Vincent? And Tom and I did a lot of work in trying to understand where this guy came from. He was in a foster home for part of his time. He had an institutionalized childhood, and he was back in the public school system at age 11. That would have been sometime in the 70s. He would have been dressed very awkwardly. He would have probably been ostracized because he would have looked odd in the kind of brutality of, pre-teens and early adolescence. We postulated an alcoholic, abusive father who was culturally very progressive. He was probably part of Ed Sadlowski's Steelworkers Local in Gary. He was a Vietnam veteran. He had friends who were African-American. The south side of Chicago, at Checkerboard Lounge, just 30 minutes away in the Calumet Skyway. So the father, probably in the 60s and early 70s, was probably an aficionado of jazz. There was a great jazz scene on the south side of Chicago, modern jazz quartet. But it's almost as if the father blamed the son, i.e. Vincent, for what happened to the mother. And the father drank, and as Gary was being reduced into, looked like Dresden at the end of the Second World War. The father never tutored the boy in jazz, but the boy extolled the virtue of knowing about jazz because he heard his father talk about jazz, not to him but to other people. And that's why he knew about jazz, and that's why he learned about jazz. Now, his father, Vincent's father, never tutored Vincent about jazz, because he had rejected his son and ignored him. It was something that got constructed as backstory, and the work I did with Tom during pre-production and understanding every aspect of the character of who Vincent was, much more than appears in the text of the film, so that the fractions of Vincent-ness that we have in the text of the film within these 10 hours could resonate with the totality of a life, the same as they would with anybody you met. That we all bring our whole history with us into any moment of the present. But Vincent knows all about jazz, and it's just explained it in a way that's kind of related. Now, it's not a direct metaphor for what's happening in the film, but it's very closely associated. It's almost an analog rather than metaphor about improvisation, about having a theme, having a structure, but then being able to improvise.
Most people, 10 years from now, same job, same place, same routine, everything the same, just keeping it safe over and over and over. 10 years from now, man, you don't know where you'd be 10 minutes from now, do you?
And so Vincent here is starting to verbalize the themes that as he sees into Max. He really reads Max. That's part of Vincent's job. It's part of his craft, is to read Max. So Vincent already knows all that we know about Max, which is that Max is not improvisational. And he also knows that Max is along on a ride in which Max has no idea what's going to happen to him 10 minutes from now. So it's really the first articulation of two of the central themes. Each of these guys personify, they're in opposition to each other. And the two story tracks between the LAPD and the FBI have converged, and now their information is actually revealed to us, because we have not known up to this point who these people are who are being killed, which is very unusual when you think about it. We're engaged in a picture in which Vincent is killing people, and he's taken captive Max, who's compelled to go along with him. And we don't know why the people who are being killed. There are obviously crimes of dispassion, as Vincent is indifferent. And we're going to discover later that Vincent isn't even sure why they're being killed. So the way the information is marshaled, the way it's moved around and where it's revealed is fascinating to me, and it enhances for me the sense of immediacy, because when you are immediately in the moment of something, you don't know the backstory, you don't know the context, you don't know everything about where people came from. You're just occupied with with the right now of it. And that's what appealed to me about doing this film, was that could I make a motion picture in which I can engage the audience in the right now of it without a lot of history, without a lot of exposition, so that it kind of, in a way, almost simulates our experience of the present when we're put in a context we don't know. We don't know the circumstances. We don't know exactly where we are. The landscape may be somewhat foreign to us. And so we have less answers than we have answers. And as the impressions impact upon us, one after the other in sequence, some of that experience, that's what I wanted to, that's what attracted me to tell this story, because it did that. It had that immediacy to it. I found it very exciting. This is Tom Rothrock's cue. Most of the composing is done by James Newton Howard, who did excellent work, particularly a very, very difficult piece towards the end of the film, which is alternately orchestral and percussion. But this particular piece was composed by Rothrock, whose strength is in this kind of blues mode, which you're hearing right here. He also did with the cue that opens the movie. And I view music as telling different parts of the story, so sometimes just as you have multiple characters, you should have slightly different perspectives on the music, all fitting into a plan about how the story ought to tell itself.
On L20, I need a backup on a 187 suspect.
This begins a music cue by James Newton Howard that's going to alternate between orchestral, with horns and low strings, meaning cellos, violas, double bass, and a horn section, and percussion. And it begins here, and it's an extremely long cue. It goes for almost 16 or 17 minutes taken in total. It was written and composed as a unified cue. And that was some of the fascinating dynamics of the construction of this narrative for those of us who made the film. Because it's immediate, and because it takes place in 10 hours, that means you examine smaller pieces of time under a very powerful microscope, which means that events which normally in a normal film might occupy 2.5 minutes, in this film occupy 5 minutes, because we examine them much more closely. And so consequently, music cues that would be 2 or 3 minutes, which are more conventional, become 5 and 6 minute cues, or in this case, a long cue becomes a hugely long cue. It wasn't planned that Vincent fall over the chair, but when he did, it's one of those accidents. I love it when something happens that's unexpected. It's kind of an anomaly. I sometimes ask myself, what are the characteristics of an event or an activity that are going to make it simulate something real or feel to me as if it's real? And it's the things that don't go exactly according to plan. I tend to be attracted to them.